Hey everyone. So, with emotional intelligence, a lot of people don't realize that it's actually like a whole skill set made up of individual little skills or competencies. This is the way that I was trained back in, I think, about 2019. Yes, and what we learned was that there are 26 individual competencies or skill areas that make up this trait or this skill of emotional intelligence. So there's actually a lot to it. We're talking about resilience today, which is one of the 26. But if you're interested, here are a few of the others: emotional self-awareness, behavioral self-control, assertiveness, empathy, communication, conflict management as well, optimism, stress management, innovation, creativity, building trust, teamwork. There's, like I said, 26. So it's a lot. Today I chose to just focus on resilience. One of them, it's a really big one, I think a really powerful one. And this is something that I think a lot of parents sometimes are, concerned about building and fostering in their kids, because we all know that life is not without its adversities and its troubles and struggles and things like that. As kids, they're going to go through upsetting times, even as teens and definitely as adults. If you think about it, we have, things like arguments or conflict or breakups or, losing a job and things like that. There are things that we need to be able to handle. So obviously resilience is that skill, being able to move through it. Some call it bouncing back, however you kind of want to describe it. So today I'm looking at, is resilience something that we're born with, or actually can we build it? And what if we've been thinking about stress and adversity all wrong, especially when it comes to raising kids? I think so many of the parents that I have coached over the last few years, they really say they feel like they're kind of fumbling in the dark with this stuff, just trying to obviously raise emotionally strong kids and have a healthy family, but they actually don't really know what is right, what's best practice, and what does the science say. And again, like most of us just want to not repeat the patterns that we grew up with, but it doesn't actually mean that we automatically know what to do instead. So that's why I kind of often have guests on the podcast who know the actual research in raising kids, and they know how to explain it in a really easy to understand way. That's what I love. So today's no different. I have Tim Curtis. He's a former SAS Squadron Commander. He's a resilience expert, and he's the co-author of The Resilience Shield. So this guy knows his stuff. And he's Aussie too, and we had a great conversation. He's actually spent years leading high-stakes military operations. He's been consulting for the UN. Now he's helping people understand, what does it actually take to build resilience in people. And some of the stuff that he shares, to be honest, it might actually challenge what you thought you knew. So that's really cool. So we're going to dive into why kids actually do need stress, like some levels of stress and what that looks like, how overprotective parenting can backfire, and then obviously some science-backed ways that we can strengthen our own resilience and our kids too. Plus, Tim actually shared this really relatable, but also actually deeply powerful story about his own 14-year-old's forgotten lunch that I think, every parent could definitely do with hearing. With me, like so many parents, I started out just wanting to raise happy, healthy kids and have a happy family. But I quickly realized that the traditional kind of ways of parenting and that advice didn't really align with what actually worked. And I found myself questioning some of those old school like discipline tactics, the timeouts and the smacking. I was like, this isn't working. It's making it worse, and I hate it, and I'm more stressed. And anyway, struggling with big emotions, both mine and my kids. And I was often wondering why no one taught this stuff growing up. Why didn't they teach us this when we were having, a baby? So that's when I discovered emotional intelligence, thank goodness, and it completely changed the way that I parent. Now I obviously help other parents to navigate this journey to get rid of those outdated parenting tactics and approaches, and actually raise resilient, emotionally intelligent kids without all of that yelling and punishment and power struggles and stuff like that. So kind of want to say, if you've stumbled across the podcast, welcome. If you have listened to some other episodes, thank you so much for being here and for coming back for this one. And before we begin, as usual, I do like to acknowledge the Darug Nation, because they're the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work and record this podcast. I pay my respects to all First Nations people and their elders and ancestors, and I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and I stand in solidarity towards a shared future. I am very excited to have you on. This has been a challenge. You're a very busy man, and also you're moving around different time zones. So we were just talking before we hit record that it is very lucky that we're on at the same time, on the same place, and we're here doing this recording.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been the star of my show, my most recent show, my recent book. So it's awesome to connect on the podcast.
First thing I want to ask you is, this may be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it for a lot of people who, resilience is still, I think, like emotional intelligence, a little bit of a buzzword. And people think, oh, I want my kids to be resilient, or I want to be resilient to handle all of life's ups and downs. Here's the question. Are we born with like a static level of resilience? Does it depend on how resilient our parents were or are? Is it genetic? Take us through sort of, because you know a lot of the research around what really resilience is and where it comes from and how we can, obtain it.
The answer to the question is yes, that we have an innate layer of resilience. We talk about layers that contribute to your resilient shield, that thing that defends you, but also defends your friends, your family, and your colleagues. What we know from the research is 25 to 40% of any person's resilience exists in that innate layer. And that's not a guaranteed 25 to 40%, but a maximum score of 40, which means that 60 to 75% of our resilience is incredibly modifiable. Now, unsurprisingly, the younger we are, the more we rely upon that innate level of resilience. And the older we get, the less that becomes relevant. There's an additional problem with the innate layer of resilience, and that is, for most of us, it's not very modifiable. It's genetics, it's epigenetics, it's nature plus nurture. But I can't rewind the clock and change my DNA where I was brought up or how I was brought up. So it's a very fixed construct. That said, for you and I, it's fixed. And of course, therefore, let's focus on the things that are truly modifiable. However, for parents or parents to be, that innate layer is quite important, that they can start making a contribution to their kids' resilience before they've even decided to have a child. And we do that through healthy lifestyle and mindset and being in a psychologically good place. When the baby's in utero, we know how important it is to make sure that that baby remains healthy and we don't expose it to levels of stress. Where we see cortisol released, we know it impairs a baby's development. Even at the point of birth, we know that babies that are born naturally have better gut microbiomes than those that come from C-sections. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone decides that, we've got to have a natural birth, but there are definitely significant influencing factors that create importance in that innate layer.
Wow. Okay. So what about for those of us who think, maybe I did have a traumatic or difficult pregnancy or birth, or those, my child is, let's say, 10, and those first few years were challenging for us. Maybe there was, separation and divorce, things like that. There's so many factors. It sounds like despite what happened early on, I mean, that does have a definite impact, but there are things we can do. You talk about it, resilience being modifiable, and actually something that again, when I was just snooping on the website, you talk about resilience being dynamic, multifactorial, and modifiable. So can you kind of clear up or just explain that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we wrote the first book, The Resilient Shield, because of our ignorance, that our first careers were in the military special operations fraternity, that we were exposed to moments of adversity and trauma. And we expected, because we'd all been through the same training, psychologically and physically screened, we'd all done the same courses, we followed the same procedures and doctrines. Surely we should have exactly the same outcome. And that wasn't true. And it was confusing. Well, how can that be the case? We look ostensibly the same. How can we have these different trajectories? And I wrote this with two co-authors, Dr. Dan Pronk and Ben Pronk. Dan had his own exposure to post-traumatic stress. And it was because of that and because of our ignorance that we thought, well, we've got to really research it. And so we identified that resilience is multifactorial. It's made up of a whole heap of different elements, not just that innate layer, but there's a mind component, mindset, and the importance of meditation, mindfulness. There's a body layer, sleep, diet, and exercise, unsurprisingly. There's a social layer, the importance of our social support network, those that we're there for and those that are there for us. And there's a professional layer that if you're not so good at your job, regardless of whether you're a stay-at-home dad or working on the high street, it's likely to bring more stress into your life. So we've got to level out the competence and the confidence in our professional layer. And then we have a bonus layer, adaptation, that recognizes that if you're broadly resilient in those other categories, adaptation will allow you to do things that you never thought were possible. So that's the layers, which creates that multifactorial approach. They're also modifiable. We have a survey that is also evidence-based. It's administered in conjunction with the University of Western Australia that allows anyone to assess, well, where am I on my lifelong endeavour that's individual, by the way. It's not fair to compare resilience nor stress on this journey of resilience. And then now you know where you are, you can do something about it, that it is modifiable across those layers beyond the innate layer, and a little bit in the innate layer too when it comes to values and personality and some other constructs. And then the last part is it's dynamic, that we can be more or less resilient depending on what's happening in our life. It's not a fixed construct that we can get better at it, or conversely, we can be worse at resilience if we're not making regular, meaningful contributions. So to close out your original question, what happens if we have negative life events as a young person? Well, one of the interesting concepts shows that kids that have what's called in the academic construct a moderate amount of trauma actually become more resilient. So it's a bit like the Goldilocks model. Two guys, Yerkes and Dodson, came up with the Yerkes-Dodson law that relates to performance and stress. And what that model tells us is it can't be too little stress, it can't be too much, it just has to be the right amount. And what the academics say is the right amount is a moderate amount of stress. That an adversity quotient contributes to stress. Like IQ and EQ, an adversity quotient is necessary in order for our kids to grow up more resilient versions than we thought perhaps they might be. So not all stress is bad is the takeaway.
Ooh, okay. That makes me feel a lot more relieved because, you know, we have moments. I'm thinking of multiple moments of my two kids. So they're 7 and 10. They're younger than yours. I know your kids are older, right?
Older.
Yeah. So I'm remembering times where, you know, I've yelled at the kids, or we've handled things poorly, or they have come home from a day at school where there was one just a couple of weeks ago where my daughter said that, so she's 7, and she said there were 4 boys who were, for want of a better word, attacking her, trying to push her and hold her, you know, stop her from going to the bathroom, and just, you know, things that we had to obviously talk about. And I was like, oh my God, you know, and it's really, yeah, I want to say a relief to know that our kids and us, we can go through these challenging moments and these adversities, and it's not going to mean that we're going to be scarred for life and we're not going to be able to get through them, and it's you know, really bad. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And as parents, we want to protect. It comes from this place of love. But there is a problem if we're constantly trying to judge something or fix something. You know, the domain of the helicopter parent, that parent that's always hovering around to swoop in when necessary, or conversely, the bulldozer parent that just moves everything out of the way of the child. If you recognize that all stress is not bad, that we need some stress for our kids to perform, to grow, to be more resilient, then we don't want to dive in and fix everything for them. So enabling them to recognize the emotion, to be able to have this component of self-awareness. And only in having self-awareness can they do some reflection. And only in reflecting can they actually regulate. I mean, this is Charles Mann's via Lars Sudman, the self-leadership model, which is completely transferable to kids. Those 3 things are crucial. but we short circuit it if, as parents, teachers, coaches, carers, we dive in and try and fix the problem too quickly. I mean, as great clinical psychologists told me when I was researching extensively for the book on how we do resilience better in kids, they said, let them sit in the emotion for a while and just be present, be with them, be supporting, be caring, be loving, but don't dive onto it and try and define it or try and solve it.
Yeah, that is so good. I have had to make it a practice to when my kids say, "Oh, this thing happened at school," or "I can't find my, book or something." I have to
Mm-hmm.
make it a practice just to go, "Oh," and just wait. Or like, "That
Mm,
sucks." Because
mm,
it is way too easy. So I have a pediatric therapist background. So I'm used to, like, I get kids, I'm especially my own, like I can swoop in, I can help them, I can do all the things. And I have to actually stop myself and just pull. It's almost like pulling back a little bit and just waiting.
mm.
And 9 times out of 10, then they will sort of like wipe their eyes and hop off my leg and knee and go and do the thing. Or I'll hear it's okay, I found it. And I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, like,
exactly. And your kids are fast approaching that age where you need to take the words of wisdom from this beautiful child educator called Celia Lashley, who wrote an amazing book called He'll Be Okay. It's a boys' book, but she worked both on boys and on girls. And her experience was from the New Zealand prison systems where she saw kids make an error, just one mistake, and that mistake meant that they were incarcerated. And she has this beautiful analogy, a metaphor, a structure for us to think about. It's you've got to send your kids over the bridge, but you can't go with them. You can't be holding their hands all the way over the bridge. You've got to stay on one side. You know they can't fall off the bridge. It's perfectly engineered. There's guardrails on either side, but they've got to take the journey. And the way that we translate that in simple terms, think about us making lunch for our kids, even when they're incredibly capable of making their own lunch. That's us walking over the bridge with them. We want to be teaching them skills that enable them to self regulate, to actually get a bit of that impulse control, to problem solve, to reconcile differences. And in order to do that, we've got to stay on this side of the bridge, recognizing that we're always there to love and care and support them, but not dive in and hold their hand every step of the way. I had a little quick story. My boy, when he was 14, we always made his lunch for him. And I said, no, we've got to allow him to walk over this bridge in a very safe environment. He can't possibly starve if it goes wrong. Ryan, you're making your own lunch. And he came down the next morning, typical teenager. He'd forgotten that he had to make his own lunch. He said, where's my lunchbox? We said, we told you, you're making your own lunch. He grabbed a packet of chips and an apple, threw it in the lunchbox and stormed out the door and came home that afternoon hungry, but it wasn't life changing. It wasn't devastating.
yeah.
And he never did it again. From the next day, he got up and made his own lunch. So it's not often that we need to nudge or budge them a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in order for them to be cast off over the bridge and gain this bit of independence.
And what I love is that you didn't say, okay, you're running late, and yes, we'll make it one more day, or it's okay, we'll do it for you. But you also didn't say, sucks to be you, get on the bus, you don't have time, or get in the car, I guess you're going to starve today, and that will teach you your lesson. Like, you didn't
Yeah.
you didn't kick him off the bridge, but you didn't walk across it with him. You like held that, I don't know, what would you call that, but
Yeah,
brilliant.
you just held the moment. Look, and I love the concept of the teachable moment. This was a teachable moment. The morning he forgot, and when he came back that afternoon, there were two teachable moments. What can we learn from this, Ryan, in you not preparing your lunch? And in the afternoon, what did you take away from not having a healthy, wholesome, full lunchbox? He never did it again. And so, yeah, I love that we can use these little teachable moments to get the best from our kids to enable them to be a little bit resilient. And remember that the dynamic construct means we want to start them early. We want to start them early when things aren't labeled. We want to start them early where there isn't stigma associated with it. And so as they grow up, it just is normal. Let me give you two more examples. So I meditate. I've got a formal meditation practice, even when my kids were very little. And they would come into where I was meditating, and my youngest in particular would say, "Dad, what are you doing?" So I'm meditating, Luce. Oh, looks like you're sleeping. And off she'd go. Now they walk into the room, they don't think about it as meditation. That's just what I do in the mornings for that little time window. In the same way, if you grow up with your kids in the kitchen, engaging their senses on spices and touch, and remember, senses and emotions have a very close relationship. Our emotions are driven by what we see, smell, hear, and other things. They don't grow up in a healthy um, environment in the kitchen where they're always eating well, thinking that's nutrition. They just grow up thinking that's how we eat, that's how we should eat. And so it doesn't deserve the label if we do it right. And if you extrapolate this out, they're little tiny minor things, but building resilience in our kids and ourselves are about little tiny minor things that we regularly do with consistency.
Okay, so what are some of the little tiny things that you did as a family when your kids were younger, or maybe now, that are these little, you said you meditate and they observed you doing that. What are some other little things, maybe like, would you call them these kind of habits or these rituals or just things that you do as a family that have
Yeah,
built sort of some resilience?
yeah, beautiful, Steph. And maybe I can tell you what I didn't do for over a decade. I walked through 16 years in the military. About a decade at the time, I walked through a unit where the first word on the unit's name was special, the Special Air Service Regiment. And it drove this confidence, but it also drove this sense of service. And I without question, biased everything to be part of that unit, and probably had to a certain extent. But I was still a dad. I still had to finish up the high risk training, the things that nearly killed you on that day in order to be at the leading edge of military special operations units in the world and go home and parent. And it wasn't great if I took that back into the house, nor was it great when I went from the house the next day and was still thinking about the poo that was smeared on the mirror. And so, tip number one is psychological transition. Make sure that when you are transitioning back into the life of the family or from the family home going into what you do each day, that you're able to use a zone, and it can be a time zone, a geographic zone, a location, a duration of distance, or something else that you apply that enables you to go in to whatever that next endeavor is as the best version of you. Coming into the family home, I wanted to be the best version of me as husband and parent, as dad. And so I had to leave that to one side. And there's plenty of little techniques you can use here. There's Dr. Adam Fraser's model of reflect. What did I learn about my day at work? What are my key takeaways? Then rest. What am I doing just to relax my psychology and my mental state? And then reset. And I'd encourage people reset on the basis of how do I want to enter the house? Because if you're bringing all the stress from work into home, that's going to be infectious, that you are going to bring the energy levels down in the house.
Yeah, what
So
you were talking
what's
about, it reminded me, this is the third space, is that right?
That's right. That's Adam Fraser's book. It's called The Third Space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant.
And whether it's we've talked to people who have a gnome in the front yard, and when they get home, they touch the gnome, and then on touching the gnome, it's that tactile interaction with this innate thing that enables them to say, okay, now I'm home. Um, there's been some awesome examples of parents that get home and simply like slap their thighs that, okay, now I'm home and I'm mum or dad. So that'd be thing number one. Thing number two is modeling behaviors. We've known for decades the concept of motor mimicry is alive and well with kids, that they will look at us and those behaviors that they're witnessing will be normalized for them. If they see violence in the house, if they see aggravated parents, if they see an absence of calmness, an absence of love, that's the environment in which becomes normal for them. However, if they recognize that mum and dad are caring and compassionate, that they interact with the kids in a very calm and balanced way, right down to things like exercise, eating well, looking after yourself, being nice to people, even on the telephone or in a cafe or a restaurant, then those behaviours all do model to mould a little bit of our kids' personalities. That'd be my second example. And the third example for parents is really to think, certainly in the concept of resilience, where are you leaving money on the table? And in order to work that out, go and do the resilience survey. It's free, it's private, it's confidential. Now you'll know what the areas are that you need to make a contribution to, and nearly guaranteed that making a contribution in that area will positively impact your family life and your kids.
So I started the quiz and I realized I didn't have enough time when I started. So it's holding, but it did ask about my sleep. And I thought, let me just count up the hours. And that concept of what are we leaving on the table? I already had little ping ping, a few different ideas of like where I could, my sleep is okay. That is okay. But some other areas where I thought, oh my goodness, how often do I do vigorous exercise where I can't talk because I'm like, and so it gave me some really good ideas. And as you said, it's free and it's on the website. I'll put the website if you guys want to complete it. I'll put it in the show notes and I'll put it down below underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube, because I think even just doing that, as I said, I haven't finished it, but I'm assuming, do you get some recommendations at the end? Because I already had some ideas going, man, I could do this.
Yeah, that's right. So it's 42 questions. It should take you about 7 or 8 minutes to complete, and at the end of that, you'll get a summary against our evidence-based model of how you score, which can be a bit confronting because it sits you on the bell curve with tens and tens of thousands of respondents. But don't worry, it's not a competition. Don't worry about the comparative scores. Just look at your scores relative to each other. Pick the lowest score and identify, well, what can I do to make a contribution here? You think about that example, if you sleep better, then you're likely to be more balanced and rational in the house. We know that sleep is super fickle. We should be getting 7 to 8 hours. For new parents, it's incredibly compromised. But how can you fight to keep it in your life? And you think about how we apply sleep models to our kids. It's discipline, it's structure, it's patterns, it's routine, that we want them to be doing the same thing in the same order in order to go to sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time. But we don't do it for ourselves. So how can you continue to fight to try and get your sleep routines right? And the second example is one of exercise. It's not so much vigorous exercise. In fact, what we know from the medical fraternity, 150 minutes a week in zone 2. Now, zone 2 is 60% of your heart rate. It's actually where you can continue a conversation with someone. You can finish a sentence. That's all we need to be doing. And interestingly, last week, some studies out of the US indicates you can do 150 minutes in one session. It doesn't have to be 5 days of 30 minutes. So a little contribution, yeah, don't worry, a little contribution to yourself is definitely going to role model the behavior and make a contribution to you being a better parent, carer, educator, uncle, aunt, grandparent. Not heroic changes, just little things that you can do to improve and maintain that consistent approach.
Okay, you've had such I want to say, unique background with your work in the SAS. What are some things that I'm just fascinated, because it's such a, not many people are in that sort of profession and have been through everything that you have. Are there some things that you really can like pluck out that you learned and experienced in that work and you still apply today as a dad and in your work now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe the simplest example I'd draw from a James Elroy Flecker poem called The Golden Journey to Samarkand. It's a poem that's got a great deal of meaning to the Special Air Service Regiment. It sits on the clock tower in the house or the home of the SAS globally in Hereford, the UK, where that was the first ever SAS unit. And it recognises an interaction with pilgrims who are departing Baghdad on their way to Samarkand. And the master of the caravan before the pilgrims depart is going and checking all of the traders. And he sees these filthy group of traders who are ready to go, but they look disgusting. And he says, "Who are ye in rags and rotten shoes, ye dirty bearded, blocking up the way?" And the pilgrims respond to him, "We are the pilgrims, master. We shall go always a little further." And that last line is probably the most powerful thing that anyone can do. How are we going always a little further to improve ourselves, our outlooks, our mindset, our performance, our sleep, our nutrition, taking the stairs instead of the escalator? The little things that we can do to go always a little further make massive contributions in our resilience, but also in our general performance. No matter how you define performance, it's stapled into metrics on the high street in which you work, great. If you define performance inside your household in being a good husband, wife, parent, carer, educator, it doesn't really matter. Going always a little further will contribute to that.
Wow, I like that. Just going a little bit further. That's really profound. Okay, maybe we wrap up with what are, if you wanted to share just a few takeaways or some simple little changes that parents could do either for their own resilience or to start actively building their child's resilience. Do you have just like a couple of things or a few, like where do we start?
Yeah, the first one would be to recognize that there is no manual or procedure for a child, even though you can walk into a bookshop and it looks like there's perfect manuals and procedures. And, we're probably both guilty having written books that might look like manuals or procedures. But the recognition is really one that belongs to Jean Piaget. This guy was born in 1896 and he recognizes that there are four distinct stages of child's development. And we've got to parent them differently in these stages. We've got to parent them differently as a toddler, a waddler, a tween, and a teen. And there are things that we can do to improve their resilience in each of those levels. Let me give you a really dumb example, but one that relates to emotional intelligence. You can't teach a toddler a formal meditation practice. You would really struggle doing that, but you can certainly teach them self-awareness. You can teach them to sit in that emotion, to recognize it, to maybe explain it in a 2, 3, or 4 year old vocabulary in order for them to identify, oh, yeah, that is anger, or that is me being upset. And once they recognize that, they can work out, well, what was the origin of it? I love the line that you gave to me, actually, Steph. Lend your frontal lobe to your kids. Yeah, that'd be observation number 2, that we're no better credentialed. We're highly qualified to parent, but for some reason we don't feel comfortable doing it. It's not as if we're trying to raise and develop a surgeon from the age of 2. We've all kind of been there. And lending your frontal lobe to the kids is quite important. It recognizes that our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the age of 25, that our boys, certainly the pubertal hormones affect the amygdala, which governs fight, flight, freeze response. And of course, the pubertal hormones in girls affect other neurochemical drivers, but they can't reconcile things like we can. So having them to, quote, get a grip, that's not particularly helpful. So in actual fact, the best thing you can do in lending your frontal lobe to the kids is allow them that level of recognition that this is an emotion. And this starts from when they are 0 years plus 1 hour, that babies regulate based on the interaction with their parents and carers. They actually learn breathing mechanics based on their observations on the motor mimicry from parents and carers. And so we can start to improve the resilience when our kids are tiny. And I'm talking, what's that, 10 inches long, maybe.
Oh, when they still fit in from your elbow to your hand.
So great.
I
So
remember
great.
making a cup of tea with one hand and holding my son with the other. And I actually got such a sore wrist because I thought, okay, he's getting too heavy for me to do things with one hand now. So
we all had big biceps on one arm, didn't we? But that's great, that you're doing something for you. You're calm, you're balanced, it's rational, and I'll guarantee that that little baby in the crook of your arm was incredibly calm, felt incredibly loved and connected because you didn't have heightened states of arousal. So let's do more of that.
Wonderful. This has been an absolute pleasure. Tim, I'm so grateful for you coming on and sharing. You have so much knowledge, so wise. So you can quote all the research as well, which is something that often just goes poof from my mind, and I just get into the kind of stories. But I really like that you kind of balanced, your stories, your experiences, and examples, and the research as well. Just such a wealth of information. So I want to say a massive thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Steph.
Hey everyone, it's me again. That was such a cool conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, I actually want to spend like 2 minutes reading out a little bit of the factual information about resilience. That sounds really boring. I don't mean it in that way. But this is the stuff I mentioned right at the start when I got trained and in emotional intelligence as a consultant and coach. We learned that there are 26 competencies or skill areas that make up emotional intelligence, one of them being resilience. So for those of you who are a bit nerdy like me, if you want to stick around for 2 minutes, I'm going to read out a little bit of info about what this says. I actually often use this in coaching. Sometimes when I coach parents, we're actually just really focused on how can we, stop getting so stressed and snappy with our kids' behavior. Other times parents are like, no, this is about me. I want to just focus on my resilience, my empathy, my emotional awareness, not so much about my kids. It's just like me as a human. And then I get out exercises like this and, we go through them and, it's really, really helpful. So because, again, like who was taught this stuff? Not me. Okay. So they define resilience as the perseverance, the ability to persevere, basically, which is like kind of pushing through, but also the diligence in the face of setbacks. So it is continuing. It's not getting bogged down. It's not like falling in a heap and just giving up. It's really persevering and continuing to try or, find another way to solve a problem sort of thing when you're experiencing adversity or a setback. So this is what it looks like for people who do have, maybe a strong level of resilience. Number one, they know how to cope in spite of setbacks, barriers, or limited resources. So it's around coping. Second thing is they're willing and able to overcome obstacles to get what they want. So things are going to get in your way, like rocks in your path kind of thing. They are willing and able to overcome those. I'm not saying it's easy. Third one, they bounce back from adversity and disappointments. So that's a big one, disappointments, when things don't go to plan or you miss out on something you really wanted. So able to bounce back. Also being flexible and adaptable, because, you might have a plan of doing something, going somewhere, being this certain way. And when, again, rocks come in your path or barriers, then you are flexible and kind of adjust your plan as to help you reach your goal. Last one is you see setbacks as temporary and failures as isolated and short term. I actually think that's a really important one. Setbacks are just temporary. It's not like, oh my God, it's always going to be this way, or I'm never going to get past this, or I just can't, there's no way. It's like, okay, it's temporary, it's isolated, it's a short-term thing. There'll be a way I always say to my kids, there's always a way to solve a problem. It might not be how you expect or how you want, but you've got to be able to adjust that, which is being flexible and adaptable, right? So let's say it's raining and they really wanted to go, out to the park or something. Then there's always a way to solve the problem. It doesn't mean like I clear up the skies and there's no more rain and we go. But it might mean that we pick something else instead that is indoor, that is fun and active, or, we plan it for another day and then make some other ideas of what to do in the meantime, So being kind of flexible and adaptable and solving the problem of, well, we wanted to go out together and have fun, like we can do that in different ways. Okay, so last thing is people who are lacking this skill or this competency, they will often see failures as permanent. So you guys, for all of these, you can kind of mentally tick box in your head if you think, oh, I kind of do that a lot. That's something that then you could focus on, make it a bit of a point of focus that you want to grow in this area. Seeing failures as permanent, demonstrating inflexible thinking, tending to dwell in the past, getting stuck in the past, not being able to move forward. And then the last one is they experience a great deal of negative self-talk, like, what were you thinking? Or you're such an idiot, or you'll never come back from this one. Negative self-talk can be such a barrier to creative thinking, innovative thinking, and positive, optimistic thinking, which is what you need when you're, facing an obstacle or an adversity and you need to be able to move past it or kind of work around it. I don't know. I find that stuff really interesting. I hope that kind of helped with a little bit of your understanding of resilience. The last thing I do want to say is that I have been mentioning in the last few episodes, I have a number of courses that are all around everything to do with emotional intelligence, and I'm constantly adding to them, especially this year in 2025. Crazy that we can say that now. And we're already like towards the end of January. Holy moly. So one of them is called How to Raise Emotionally Intelligent Kids. That's kind of the introductory course. It's really easy, a nice, easy one. I also have From Reactive to Responsive Parenting. So this is a really popular one. It's for you if you're feeling like a bit of a snappy, shouty, yelly, exhausted parent, then that is a really good one. If you have kiddos with ADHD or you're a teacher and you have ADHD kids in your classroom, then you may really want to check out my course called From Blow-Ups to Balance, because it's emotional intelligence for raising kids with ADHD or working with kids as well. Chaos to Connection is my 10-week deep dive course. So that's definitely deep. That is like, give yourself several weeks if you really want to immerse yourself in emotional intelligence and emotionally intelligent parenting, then there you go. That's a great one. And one of my other favorites is Evolve. I love that one. Evolve with Emotional Intelligence, basically because it's for parents like you and I who are really busy, but you still want to develop your emotional intelligence. You still want to understand your kids' sometimes baffling, frustrating behavior. You would like to learn more about how to overcome your triggers, how to connect and communicate with your kids, how to get rid of punishments and harsh consequences and all of that stuff. These are like fast, laser focused videos. They're about 5 to 8 minutes each. They're really short, and there's about 35 plus, I think, of them. So there's heaps there, but they're really, really great for busy parents. The last two, there's obviously one on EFT tapping, because if you guys have heard some of my lives and workshops and, podcast episodes, I talk about EFT tapping. That's a really powerful way to, overcome some of those stresses, frustrations, big emotions, challenging moments. And that's a really powerful somatic way to help you move past those, and very rapidly too. And then, the last one I'm going to mention is Decoding and Diffusing Challenging Behavior. This actually has all new content as of this year. It's for if your toddler or child or teen is sometimes lashing out and blowing up, or maybe going the other way, shutting down, and you can't get through to them, then this course is for you, because it's all about the nervous system, how to understand fight, flight, freeze, and fawn and things like that. So it's really helping us to see why our kids sometimes behave in very, confusing and stressful, frustrating ways, and how to, know what to do and what not to do to help them in those moments. So that's a little bit from me with my courses. The easy way to go grab them is just at stephaniepinto.com/courses. But you can obviously check the show notes as well and click on the link there. That'll take you straight to those. And most of the time, I'll just pick randomly one or two maybe to put on sale. So keep an eye out for those. Okay, have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. I'll see you very soon in the next episode or somewhere online. If you don't already follow me, please get into my world, because I just love posting and sharing about all this stuff all the time. I'm on Instagram at emotionally.intelligent.parent. And you can also join my Facebook community. That's called Let's Raise Emotionally Intelligent Kids. Okay, see you next time.